if there is a CIO, CISO, CTO reading your paper and wants to respond, what concrete framework or decision checklist would you suggest for evaluating where open models should replace or complement closed models over the, let's say, next 12 to 24 months? As you rightly said, it will take time to decide. And also, if you look at the computing world, a lot of open sources there, a lot of proprietors there, but how they can start, what steps you would suggest them?
I would point them to that. Maybe we should have put this table at the front of the paper, but I would point to that table in the back of the paper. It's table 2, and it's potential explanations for open model underutilization, right? So we list out again these sort of like preferences versus information misconceptions. And I would encourage folks to like just run through that list, right? And think about, are we, why is it that we're, using proprietary and not using open, right? Is it the switching costs? Are we so baked in on the, and everything's built around the closed that it would be too expensive to move to the open? Or is it more things like the information friction? We have this kind of risk aversion, and we don't want to, think about, any of these liability types of things. And so we're okay paying for that, more support, more liability coverage and things like that. And so I think those, I think we have 8 or 9 kind of things that, literally you could just run through in 10 minutes and think about like how does our use case apply on these 9 or 10 dimensions? And how should that lead us towards, being happy that we're using closed or thinking that we should be using open more? And so that would be the advice I would generally give.
Let's just assume that if, and most of the enterprises, policymaker, they will actually act on these findings and they will start embracing a lot of open models. How do you expect the AI economy to evolve? Once again, we can draw parallel with the Linux kernel and Kubernetes. What changes do you anticipate in market structure, innovation patterns, and the balance between open and closed models over the next 5 years? Also, we can also look at the global. Right now, it's a bit a lot of friction is going on. I don't want to get into the political thing, but a lot of organizations, a lot of countries, they want digital sovereignty. They will also want AI sovereignty. They don't want the AI to be hosted in a specific country. So how do you say this may play out?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that's something that we anchor the paper by thinking about. We hear all these things that like AI is going to be this monopoly, or maybe, a couple of duopoly, a couple of companies that control the whole market. But we also see things like a year or two ago, the leaked Google memo that said, we have no moat in AI, and neither does OpenAI or anybody else because of open models, right? So we have this sort of, broad continuum of, we see the world in this kind of monopoly and one company's controlling everything, versus the commodity market where there's so many open good models that, it's basically a commodity, right? Like, and there's no real business model around the models themselves. And so where we come down from, from the analysis that we do, is that we're likely going to end up somewhere sort of in the middle, where in some use cases, much like with open source software, in some use cases, we see the open models taking over, and we see kind of, a reduction in some of the profits that are coming from that specific use case, or from the creation of the models themselves, because all these good open models exist. And then the good news is that all the profits and everything can come from what's built on top of that, right? Just like we have with open source software today, whereas not all software is free, but there are all these business models that are enabled because open source exists, right? On the flip side, we may very well still see some closed models that start specializing, right? So you can imagine things like, I don't know, like healthcare, right? Where, they want to kind of have specialized healthcare focused models, and they want them to, make sure that they're, getting all the support they need, and there's somebody to call if something breaks or something like that. So we may see, still the existence of some of the companies that exist today, or new ones, and playing this kind of more, a slightly more nuanced role, than kind of the general adoption that we're seeing now, right? And I'd compare that to kind of the history of the operating system, where, we saw this dominant player in terms of Microsoft take over all pieces of the operating system, but then slowly over time, the open models, the open operating systems like Linux chipped away at that, and we found that, oh, actually on servers, it's probably better to be using the open models, but like perhaps on desktops, it's still better to be using, closed and proprietary software, right? That's more user friendly, easier to, to have somebody to call if something breaks and things like that. And so I think what we'll see in the, again, say the 5-year time frame is we will see a continued rise of open models, as well as, still seeing some dominant players in the closed space. But we'll see this sort of separation where people start using open models more for some things and closed models more for other things. And just like we did with the history of open source in general, we'll see that sort of bifurcation as people understand the technology better and understand their own use cases better as well.